That wants to come in. How should we get them in? Okay, perfect. Thank you everybody for coming back, sticking around. Our goal here, right Gina, is to wrap up by 12:30-ish, and we have a lot to cover. So we're gonna jump in to our forum, which we're calling today Room to Grow. And we have an agenda of 2 items that are interrelated, as we'll come to see. We're gonna start by reviewing some ideas that were shared at the leadership retreat. In September, we had a great time among committee chair leaders, and we want to share some of that with the whole congregation. And we know that there are folks watching online, and also some folks who will watch a recording of this in the future. And then at about 12 or a little after, we'll pivot to this particular topic of the small side pews on either side of the pulpit. So Kit and I began the leadership retreat last month by just setting the tone of sort of where we are as a church. There's a lot of different numbers you can look at, but I thought looking at the average attendance in the month of May was one sort of helpful barometer. If you go back to 2021-22, COVID was still very much part of our lives. We had a little over 50 people on average in person, and a little more than that on average who were with us online. That's the blue chart. So you jump ahead to 22-23, we were up in terms of in-person attendance, a little bit down online, and we had some kids finally, which was great. That's the yellow bar. Then 23-24, we were past the 100 mark for in-person attendance. Average in the month of May, online about holding steady, more kids. And then this was last May, right? We were up near 150 in terms of in-person attendance, a little bit down in terms of kids, holding almost steady in terms of online. And as Gina will tell us, this sort of 150 mark, which if you add up the green and the yellow bars, we had already sort of surpassed last spring. That brings us into the territory of really being considered a different kind of church, right? What we call a pastoral-sized congregation. So Gina's going to bring us into that a little bit more in a second. This is just another chart that might be useful. Hopefully some of you know these numbers already, but if you look back to 21-22, we had 250 active members at First Parish. And then you see year by year moving up, and last spring with our last joining, we got to 298 active members. Really exciting, right? And this blue chart, this blue graph is interesting too. This is the number of new members who joined each year. So you can see last year we had 31 new members join in the year. We have a great group that we're working on who's going to join our church next month in November. So these are continuing to increase. And so I think the question for us to answer, right, and this is for everyone in the congregation, is how do we manage that growth? How do we live into that growth in the way that is right for First Parish? And so to help us do that, we're gonna look at some of what's called church size theory. And Gina, can I turn it over to you now? Gina's gonna take us through this for a few minutes.
If you think about any organization or company or church, there's a concept called size dynamics. And if a company with 5 employees operates differently than a corporation with 50 or 500. A family with 1 child probably operates differently than a family with 3 children or 5 children. Churches of different sizes also tend to operate differently, with smaller churches looking one way and very large megachurches being organized a different way. And there are people who study subjects of schools or families or companies or churches and what happens when organizations are of different sizes. One of the Bibles that I have found, Kit and Nate have read, and that I assigned to the parish committee members to read over the summer, is a book about church size transitions by Alice Mann. And this book gives us a lot of thoughts about what it means to be a church of different sizes. Thank you. So the way, just a quick snapshot of some of the theories that are listed in this book and others are this is the number of parishioners, number of members of the church, 150, 500 to 150, 150 to 300, and some nicknames for churches that are in about that size. And if your church or your family or whatever is growing over a long period of time, the changes just sort of evolve and you don't notice them as much. But if you're growing very quickly, it's more of a step function. And that's what we're experiencing here at First Parish. I'd submit that we have moved for the past several years. We were in the area of about 50 to 150 members and parishioners, and we have moved into a whole nother area, a whole nother size. The smaller church, what's called a pastoral church, tends to be, the ministers tend to be the center of the universe. Everything is on their shoulders. They know everybody. The organization is low key. You know, if you need fill in the blank, you call Tucker. You know, if you need somebody else, everybody just sort of knows what everybody else is doing. The parishioners think they're friendly and open, may not necessarily be so. And as the church grows, as the number of parishioners grows, the demands on the clergy, on Kit and Nate and Sarah, continue to grow. And it reaches a tipping point. And we are beyond that tipping point. If you go beyond that tipping point, there are 2 things that could happen. Well, there are many things that could happen, but the two that I worry about are burning out our ministerial team and our staff, and the other is that the church will plateau. You've reached a point where you can't get any bigger. If we move to the next size church, that 150 to 350, 150 to 350 kind of level, this is what it tends to look like. The ministers are more, instead of playing every instrument in the orchestra, they're more conducting the orchestra. And lay leaders take a stronger role in leading the church. Small groups and activities become a very important way to assimilate new members. Many staff and lay leaders provide support for programs. And programs and development of programs are what tend to attract people to the church. There's a clear mission statement that helps tie the whole thing together. Communications is very, very vital. And And you need a lot of reliable systems. You need a way to keep track of who are all these people, and what do they bring to the church, and what are they hoping for, and how can we continue to be a community for them. The point that we made at the Leadership Forum is that lay leadership and programs and activities are key to helping a church thrive if they've reached this point. So we went into that theory in a little more detail at our leadership retreat last month, but then we broke and had small group discussions, table discussions, asking our committee heads and leadership to think about this question. How does it feel to be a church at this transition point? Like, what does this feel like? Where are you seeing these dynamics play out currently? What do you recognize or what doesn't resonate? And what feels exciting about the growth? And what feels challenging about where we are and where we may be going? Each table had a note taker. The note takers reviewed their notes for everybody to hear, to share ideas. And this is a summary of the kinds of comments that we received. Many, many, many comments about what feels exciting. What feels exciting to many of the people there were the new people, the new ideas, the sense of energy, the vitality that people were feeling in the church. What was exciting was having more children. The number of offerings was very exciting. The thought of redefining ourselves, that was intriguing and also exciting to folks. The very fact that we're planning for growth, many people mentioned as being something that they were energized by. And the thought of having more talents, more gifts, more people to share the various aspects of the church with. So what felt challenging? Biggie. By the way, the size of the circle is loosely correlated to the number of comments that would fall into this category. So the bigger the bubble, the more people express that idea. Helping newcomers feel part of First Parish was on a lot of people's minds. How will we define ourselves as we grow and as we welcome people from different theological backgrounds? Will we be diluting our own theology? What happens as we open our doors and welcome people from all different viewpoints and opinions? How do we handle what might be inevitable arguments or disagreements or ways of looking at things in our congregation? New ways of doing things can be challenging. Change can always be challenging. Being open to new ideas. Yeah, that was a bit of self-reflection. Sometimes we're just comfortable with the way things are. And then quite a few comments that had to do with space. Being crowded in the church, having a hard time finding parking, the level of noise in the Stearns room at coffee hour. It's hard to hear each other. Even finding a spot to stand in coffee hour, being able to get to RL's cookies during coffee hour. Lots of comments about things like that. Not knowing everybody. It used to be that when you walked in the doors, you didn't even need the name tags because you knew everybody. Now there are a lot of new faces. And there's that, at least personally, that anxiety of, I know I've met that person, I've introduced myself 3 times before and I'm still not remembering their name. You know, that can be a little uncomfortable. How are we all going to know what each other is doing? How are we going to know what's going on at the church? Oh, sorry, I think there was supposed to be something else there. I might have duplicated the new ideas. More expectations on the ministers and the leaders, concern about that. And one that I think what I was supposed to put in that greenish circle was, one of the things that's challenging is all the programs. All the programs is great and exciting, and it's frustrating not being able to do everything. There's so much that so many activities in the church that many of us would like to do, and it's frustrating not always being able to do them all. So those were some of the big ideas that came out, and they might resonate with you as well. Okay, would you like me to continue? Would you like to?
Yeah, I'll step up. Do you want to start on this?
Sure. Then we had a second breakout session after a little more education, and we asked each committee member to discuss how can your organization, your program, your committee, how can you start to be part of the team to help our church through this transition? What do you need to get better at? What do we need to get better at? How can your team help engage the new members of our church and help them feel part of our spiritual organization? And what support do you need? So we didn't summarize these because many of the conversations were individual. I will tell you that we had the parish committee off at one table and the deacons at another table, so they could focus on their organizations. And for the parish committee, I'll tell you, we identified some very big areas that we'll be working on this year, and some ways that we, as a parish committee, will need to and want to change.
Just a word about, I'll take that, Gina. Just a word about the Connections team, which you see down here. We've done a little promoting of this, but we're going to do some more. This is a new team or committee made up of a few choice leaders with the goal, right, of both integrating new members and then also helping committees who might feel like, boy, we've had the same 5 people working on this for 10 years. So the side of committees that have had longtime church members working with them to support them, and then a new person who's just joined the church and has this passion but doesn't know where to sign up or who to talk to. So that's an important new committee or team that is working on all this. Chris, we might need you to pop up. No, we don't. No, we don't. I pressed the button and it's back. It's back. Sarah, we're doing all this without you. Sarah Kay is just in the back, observing. Very proud of myself today. So I would just invite you, like all of you who are in this room are leaders of the church, whether or not you're a committee leader currently, but as much as you can familiarize yourself with these terms, pastoral size, program size, and with these questions and these goals, I think that's just going to all help us, like we're moving in one direction together over the next few years. So now we're going to move on to our subtopic, our specific consideration of today, which I think relates to growth, right? Relates to growth and welcome. And just to be clear what we're talking about here, we're in the room, so hopefully we can all be clear, but I circled it like a little football diagram on TV. It's these side pews on either side of our pulpit. And here you can see this was our Welcome Back Sunday, first Sunday in September. And just to refresh people's memory, I think that Sunday we had 43 kids up here, up front. And we also had water communion that day. And so just to paint a picture, we had kids coming in with their backpacks to get their backpacks blessed. And we had a beautiful water vessel right here on that banister. And if my co-minister hadn't been thinking quickly, we would have had a backpack swinging into the water flying over, unintentionally baptizing kids. And this is just a good picture of what it feels like both for the kids, I think, and then also for the worship leaders, right? The people who are up there trying to lead the kids in a moment and stepping around and feeling hampered, as we'll get into. So this is how I want to lead us in this conversation. We're going to start with a little history. Important, right, to remember in this beautiful historic sanctuary. Then I want to tell a quick story from what I learned in divinity school, and then I'll get into some specific points about how those pews might be holding us back from growth and from welcome. So this diagram, and if you want to look at this more close up afterwards, I can keep it on the screen, but this is the original layout of our 1842 sanctuary, thanks to Dwight Gertz, who sent this along. And here's the pulpit. Here are the side pews, and then back here, of course, there was no choir loft back then, right? So, Dwight, is this the dotted line? Right, so I think that dotted line was put in by one of the architects who was working on the choir loft in late 1960s. So this shows how far back the sanctuary originally extended. But for our purposes today, it also shows that we had these side pews, and then we actually had more side pews extending out to the wall on either side. And at some point, there was a stable behind, so the building ended right there, right? It's hard to imagine. The building ended right there. There was a stable behind it, and I think at some point, the church figured out they wanted to put in doors right there. So originally, there were pews all the way out, and that was before there were doors right there and right there. This is a picture from Charlie Styron's wonderful history, which shows, if you face back this way, where the old organ was in the back of our sanctuary before the choir loft. And then in, I think, like I said, late 1960s, I believe it was finished in 1970, the choir loft was put in. So just kind of interesting to look back at the way that was back there and now the way we have it. So that history, I think, is just all to say that changes have happened in this sanctuary before. While we recognize the historicity of this, we also recognize that this space has not been the same forever. Back in divinity school, we had this luncheon that all MDiv students were invited to, and it was one of my favorite things I think about all the time. And what they did was they brought in ministers who graduated from YDS and were like 5 years out. So they'd been in a parish serving for 5 years. And I remember one time there was a really impressive young minister serving in a congregational church in suburban Connecticut, and he came back in and he was telling us all about his church. Things were going really well. But there were drapes on the sides of his sanctuary, and these drapes were there, and he didn't like how they blocked the light, or they were dusty or something, and so one morning before church, he just kind of opened them up a little bit. He opened them up, but he didn't tell anybody. He didn't talk to anybody. This was not a good idea. And what I remember from that is my professor hearing this story and looking at him and saying, "You messed with the sanctuary?" And so that's always been something I've remembered, and I tell this story like it's a lighthearted story, but it says something true about a congregation's deep relationship with their space, and that's something that Kit and I and the rest of the staff deeply respect. Like, we know that some of you that I'm looking at right now have a relationship to this space that extends like longer than I've been alive, and so I appreciate that, and I really respect that. And so it's with some trepidation, but also a lot of conviction that I want to make my case for why we should consider these side pews and how they might be standing in our way in terms of where we want to reach in terms of growth and welcome at First Parish. So here goes. So what if, right? What if? So this is a picture that David Elms, with the help of AI, generated. And that's our space without those four-side pews. Just invite you to hold that in your minds as I walk us through some sort of data points or cases here. So I think the first experience for Kid and I that really led us to start thinking about this was the way it felt up here when all the children are coming forward. Our first year, maybe 10 kids would come forward for a time for all ages. Now, as we've seen last Welcome Back Sunday, there were over 40 kids up here. So it's the monthly time for all ages. It's also the Christmas pageants. So this is a picture you've seen before. Here's a picture from our last pageant, last year, I think. You can see Miranda. I think you're trying to lead the kids in a song, but look how far back you have to be. Look at the kids craning their heads back to try to see Miranda because she can't come forward any further because she's behind those pews. Also, notice not any kids are, except maybe one here, not any kids are really able to sit in the pews when they're up speaking and singing and being part of the pageant. So I just thought this was a striking picture, right? Because you see how full the other spaces are, and then you see the pews themselves hardly being used at all. Just another sort of, it's Advent, right? So we have the Advent wreath right there. Fire near kids. The feeling of we need a little bit more space to do what we want to do up here more effectively and safely as well. In addition to making more room for our kids and the symbolism that stands for, we also think that there'd be more possibilities for music from the front of the church. We've really been blessed by having this piano that Miranda's been able to play up here. But again, with the pews here, the piano's right behind it. We've had a soloist, we've had a solo violinist come, we've had Ann Moss sing from right here, but again, kind of butting up against the pews in a way. Also, we have a children's choir now with 8 to 12 participants. They're gonna sing for us every month, making more space for them, making more space for the youth to lead their Youth Sunday service that we have in the spring as well. And then think about that baptism that we had of Catherine and Grace's child last month, if you were here. Think about every kind of special liturgical moment that happens at First Parish. The All Souls remembrance that will happen next week where we light candles up front. The water communion, I mentioned that already. New member joinings where we have to tell the new members to kind of crunch in all around here. And sometimes I'm standing like way back here, but I'd like to be further up front. Any kind of moment in the service that has a special liturgy, we could benefit from more space for. And this is sort of the third reason, but it's almost as important when we think about welcome. The traffic flow, the way it feels when you are exiting the sanctuary after church, maybe coming in from these spaces before church. If you were with us in the summer, we had that wonderful summer consortium, and I remember one moment, one of our beloved seniors using a walker, moving out of our space at the end of that service, and someone who was from another church who didn't know our space well was pretty impatient about the backup here and said something not very kind to one of our members. And that feeling of, are we respecting our seniors? Are we offering enough space for those with mobility challenges as well? And then I think about someone who's new to our space, right? And how important it is to be welcoming, but then also to like let someone get out when they're ready to be done on a Sunday, which I think is really important. And again, I think a smoother traffic flow at the end of a service especially would be enabled by it's pretty much single file right now. When you're trying to squeeze by, maybe you see somebody here you want to talk to, and I think if we just created the opportunity for double file exiting, if we call it that, that would be helpful. That would be helpful. So again, what if? And one thing Kit and I have talked about is these spaces, if we do remove the pews, these spaces offer a lot of opportunities for rugs for kids to sit in. Another question that maybe is on your mind is like, what about those services that are really crowded? Christmas Eve, Easter Sunday, where people actually do sit here, and we imagine having some nice chairs that can be brought in for those services, which probably would be able to seat even more people than the maybe 6 who could squeeze in right now. So if you imagine, 4 or 5 chairs of 2 rows on either side. So we need to be able to offer that space when we need it, right? When there's actually almost 200 people in our sanctuary. That's not a regular Sunday occurrence, but we need to be able to plan ahead. And I actually think if we had foldable chairs that were nice, we could offer that. And then a question that is logical to think about too is like, what would happen to those pews? And I think that's something that we would want to talk about. Maybe we have a suggestion box. Maybe we send one along with John Krzyzewicki and Mary to San Diego as a little memento.
I support getting rid of the pews.
John is our faithful pew sitter every Sunday.
Meeting more than a year ago, so this is not Johnny come lately thought.
Yes. John just voiced his support for this idea, and feel free to speak further later on if you'd like to. So I think we're ready for a little bit of discussion. Gina, do you want to add anything?
Not that I can think of, although, no, let's finish this. Not that I can think of. Thank you.
So I've presented the 3 reasons I think the church should consider this idea, and I'd love to just hear some thoughts from all of you. I'll also say we've talked about this idea in deacons meetings several times and in parish committee meetings already. So this feels like the next step in our process, but it's a really important one. So what's on your minds as you're taking this in? We'll go Sue and then Mary.
Well, I'm not opposed to removing the side pews, but I would think for the pageant, for baptisms, for weddings, you would get more positive effect if you removed this row of pews, this one row of pews, to open it up. So that's my only thought. Thank you.
And Sue, that's a suggestion to remove this first row.
Yeah.
Great, thank you. I think Mary had her hand up, and then we'll go to Ken.
I'm wondering about the step up to get from one side to the other. Is the floor going to be, is the plan to even it out, or is there still going to be an up and down? Because you've got a problem there, and I think you have a problem with, getting up to the pulpit. There's not a good way to, have support. I speak as somebody who needs it.
So a really great point about this front platform, which has a significant step up, and then I think inviting us to consider the whole sort of kit and caboodle here with the platform and the stairs up to the pulpit. And if I can just respond to that really quick, I think that's something Kit and I and other leaders have talked about too, and I do think we should take a look at all of that. And if we didn't have a capital campaign that was focused on our other building right now, this would be a good candidate for that. I think the side pews are something we can do now, and I do think it shouldn't be the end of trying to make this whole space better, but I think it's a first step, and then maybe we do some more work at looking at how all of this can be, more welcoming, more open, more safe. Ken, did you have one? And then we'll go to...
Just to endorse a comment about are we looking at the right set of pews to remove, because in a sense, this is very tight right here, and that's not going to change necessarily in the idea of taking those pews out. It's almost like you need a little more space at the central location for much of what goes on, but I would, I guess, say there's probably time to kind of test those ideas out.
Right, symmetry is still interrupts the space.
I'm sorry?
The symmetry of if we took that first pew out and then the side boxes would kind of be out a little ahead, right?
Hey, bring that aerial picture where you've got just the so now you can kind of imagine what it was.
I think it's worth thinking about. Yeah, a quick response?
I think your proposal is much more doable without a lot of major surgery, but it doesn't, in my mind, get away from this crowd that occurs right between this line here and the activities between there and the pulpit. It just feels like you need more space for the activities that oftentimes are focused right here in the middle like this.
Yes. Okay, do you want to go to Paula first?
Oh, sorry. Two things. I don't know whether they can be added on to the side pews or not, but one of the things that I think we could do, maybe call it temporary until we can redesign more of the pulpit, is having a handrail on either side so that those who need or have balance issues can feel safer if they're going up to the pulpit. The second idea that I have is that the sides that come out from the pulpit on either side where we usually put the plates, if they could be moved back a little bit, even not taking it off the whole way, maybe just leave enough room for the two plates to be on it, that would afford a good more amount of space up there rather than taking out the front pew, which I'm not opposed to, but.
So I'll be the voice of anxiety, and because I'm reticent to take apart a historic church. I mean, I do, I know we put the choir locked in, but I haven't always thought it's this very respectful of the historic church itself. I mean, I would propose that we start small and you could take out these pews, put them in the basement. You think of it as an experiment, see how the traffic flow works before you start taking apart the whole place for episodic experiences where we need space to put people in the pews if we're going to grow too. And we can't always be hauling chairs up to fill in for everywhere. So I would say let's take a experimental approach, try this out, but not junk the pews, or sorry, John, not even send them to San Diego yet, but give it a try. But
Love that. Thank you, Katie.
Thanks for taking this on, this consideration. It's not a new conversation. As I think a lot of people know, 25 years I stood up there and someone said, what's one thing you wish you could change about this church? And I don't think they meant physically, but I said getting rid of everything up there because it is very cumbersome. I wonder, we've looked at some of the historical things, but I'm wondering if you could remind us how historic is the actual pulpit. I don't believe it was part of the original building.
Would anybody feel able to speak on that? I mean, I can go back to the slide, but let's see what Dwight has to say.
The original construction diagrams show a pulpit of roughly that size, but we don't know how high it was. So it's something very similar to that was there. We just don't know exactly what it
Not
looked
the actual wooden structure.
We don't know. That's the diagram, and you can't tell from that whether it's the same thing we have now or whether it was something similar.
I believe I've seen a picture of the parish house. I think I've seen an old picture of the parish house where that is actually visible. Maybe I'm wrong, but it wouldn't seem out of place because it does not fit the period of the church per se.
On a different subject, I was wondering if you have considered looking at other churches that are very similar to this with designs that you think work pretty well, because that could be quite helpful, I think. There are other churches like this all over the country, and maybe you could find one that solves the problem, and that would be a good thing to know.
Thank you, Rachel.
I'm going to echo Katie's voice of anxiety. My concern is that we have been asked to give a thumbs up to a very major renovation to our parish house, to create new spaces, to house new ideas, and to welcome in as many people as we can. And I just don't feel that this is the time that we need to do things to our sanctuary to attract others. As I said to someone, I don't want it to be our spaces that attract new members. I want it to be us. I want it to be our hearts and our minds. And I just think that we're trying to do too much too fast. And also, I think I'm more sensitive right now given what's happening in Washington and the history in our White House just being bulldozed. And if that's why I'm feeling this strongly, then that's why I'm feeling this strongly. But also, I grew up in this church, and we've been this big before. We've been bigger, and I hope that at some point we will be that big again, and somehow we all fit, and enough happened to make this an exciting place. So that's my 20 cents.
Thank you, Sarah.
I just want to respond to what Sarah said. I remember as a child coming here and watching Noah's Flood, every year there would be a musical, a sacred musical like Noah's Flood, and they built a huge platform. Do you remember this, Sarah? Do you remember? There was like a platform that went over these pews. Yeah, and you would have to climb up these stairs, and I don't know what happened to that platform, but people have been trying to problem solve what we're trying to problem solve, which is visibility for all the kids in the pageant and on Sunday morning and all these extra services and rituals that happen up here for years. So I don't know. Maybe we can have a platform that we put up here once in a while.
Thank you, Miranda, and thank you, Sarah. I think RL's next.
I'll try to be a quick voice of modernity here. I remember at least 2, if not 3 times, that Roger proposed sort of getting rid of everything up here and making it all flat, so all sorts of stuff. And I actually bought into that idea then. It didn't fly then. I don't think anybody pushed hard for it. But I thought it was a pretty nifty idea, actually, when I listened to his reasons for doing it. So the pews are sort of a start for that. I don't think anybody's talking about heresy to at least put the idea forward about what would happen if you didn't have the altar or the pulpit there. But I know it's going to be very contentious, but my side is go ahead and do it if it needs to be done.
The photo research department's a little slow, but we can say with certainty that is not the pulpit that was in the Stone Church when the Stone Church was the church. Okay. We'll have a viewing of that for anybody who's that excited about the question whenever the general session is over.
we'll go to Elida and then Dana soon.
I just want to be kind of an integrating voice of making change incrementally. That there's something about, like, the idea was to take out those side pews, and then we got all these other ideas about bigger changes to make, and then we got afraid. So I think just at a broad level, picking one small step to take and seeing what difference it makes is something that I could support and that I think might be a little easier to metabolize. And then the conversations about what else to do up there could happen over a longer period of time.
Thank you, Elida.
What if we just took the outer two out? That would alleviate some of the bottleneck, and we have plenty of room to store them in the basement. And RL, when you reference Roger's plan for a flat, do you mean dropping the level of the?
Yeah, his idea was to have a flat platform with nothing there except for a lectern on the left that was movable.
With
a
no.
lectern on the right, so the word would be written, read from the left, and the speech, the sermon would be given from the right, as happens in churches. And those could all be moved away if you had a big thing. So there would be one big flat space, no pulpit. Everything would be
Ground level?
And one of his arguments was he didn't like people talking down. One of his things was he didn't feel right about having people up in a pulpit, elevated, speaking down to the congregation, that everybody was on the same level. That was his argument.
Nancy has a response, I think.
As a florist, with mindfulness of letting people who are in the back of the church see what's up at the front, I'm less involved in hierarchies and more involved in visibility.
Yeah, so just to echo Elida's point, we were really hoping, it's natural to keep thinking about what if, other alterations, but the real purpose of today is to think about the proposal about these side pews. So just to remind us of that as we get near the end of our conversation. Dana, sorry to keep you waiting.
Yes, I guess there are always as many opinions as there are people. But I must say, I always appreciate how this church speaks to me when I come into it. It's a sanctuary, a true sanctuary, of which there are few today. Everywhere we go, we are bombarded by messages, technology, now even on sidewalks or pictures, words. It is rare to have a space like this. And so I full-heartedly would be against most any change, and change by committee is certainly not the way I would go. Design is something that's very difficult, good design to achieve. It was done in this church. If we go down 117 to the Stowe Church, these are designs by, pattern designs by someone called Benjamin Asherman, I think, or not Benjamin Asher, from whom patterns were disseminated amongst communities and churches were built, but it's rare to have one done as beautifully as this church was. We can walk into the church in Stowe on 117 and you don't get the wonderful feeling of peace and sublimity that you do in this church. So I would be against making any small changes unless there's integrated change, unless it's been well thought out, unless there's been an architect whose plans we see, that we can see whether we like them or not. I personally love the shoulder-to-shoulder, bumping into people, getting in and out of the pews, the children crowded into the front of the church during busy times. We are putting so much energy and thought into the Stone Church. We're one of the few churches to have two churches, church communities, where we can have large crowds, overflows in the large spaces, large volumes up the hill. This is a treasure. And I would hate to see any changes.
Thank you so much, Dana. Mary Helen, I'm sorry we missed you.
Well, much of what I was going to say has been said, but like RL, I remember the conversations with Roger and the idea that if there were a way to at least lower it at maybe it's the same pulpit, but you lower it and get rid of that other step, but that's not possible to do without some other changes up there. So I guess I would support the idea of trying the 2 pews on either side and taking a bigger, longer-term look at what the vision really is for the rest of it, and then, you know, get a small group of people together that can look at the history and try and find out where the pulpit came from and what it means.
Just noticing we're at 12:31, so we'll have a few more comments and then maybe wind down. Sarah? Someone's online.
From our online congregation. Thank you, Catherine, for your patience. Catherine has basically echoed a lot of what's been said already, that when there's large attendance, the pews are not sufficient. I don't think the removal of the first row is a good idea. That row is used by many people, and during the pageant, children can sit there. She says if you look at the size of the activities at the pulpit, they are not large enough to justify the removing of the first row of pews. If the side pews are removed, that will give plenty of room without having to remove the front pew. Start with the side pews and work with that for a few years. Absolutely, we need the center pews, and we're growing and people need them, and also visually it affects the balance and beauty of the layout.
Thank you for that, Catherine. A few more comments as we wrap up. David, yes, I was hoping you might say something.
Just one quick comment. Hadn't thought about that. I support this idea, not only in terms of the what Nate described as the free flow of people moving from the sanctuary to the back room. Having to crank around that corner is anything but a free flow. It is indeed a bottleneck. But can you just go back to the picture of that was rendered? Yes. No, without those side pews. Yeah, thanks. Just seeing that picture is an incredible relief in terms of our sort of connection. Maybe it's a Shaker thing to the spirit of this space, which has to do with simplicity, and to eliminate those 4 pews that are at 90 degrees to everything here. It seems to be a huge sigh of relief in terms of simplicity. It also, the pulpit, as you've all said, is an architectural anomaly in terms of in terms of the surrounding space. And so to give the pulpit the surrounding space that it gets without those side pews seems to be also from an architectural point of view, sort of a blessing to the pulpit. Let it be the standalone that it is. So I'm in favor of this change, but I really, just looking at that rendering, doesn't it seem, and I'm totally with Sarah, what you just read, we can't take away the front pews, but to take away the side pews seems to be a step in terms of simplicity and function as well.
1 or 2 more comments as we wrap up.
I got carried away and said I wouldn't have any changes. I had wanted to point out too that one of the pleasing aspects of this design are the side scrolls on those pews that are perpendicular to these pews that are repeated in the volutes on each side of the altar of the pulpit, which lends grace to this space. If changes were made, I would certainly, support ideas that are, very neutral and clean lines. And just like the choir loft that Buzz Brannon had designed, it's a space that doesn't compete with the original space here that's so delicately balanced. But again, doing things piecemeal without an overall plan where things are integrated and well thought out is a mistake, I think.
Okay, we'll have 2 more comments. We'll have Mary and Paula to wrap us up.
Maybe I'm projecting from challenges in domestic space. This image where it's all very neat and clean up there with the new open spaces, that is appealing. I have to voice a little bit of a worry about the space getting cluttered up with other things. That like a screen or some kind of equipment, stuff like that. I realize that perhaps the function is foremost in the minds of people who are planning a meaningful service, but I really think there's a danger of having that space be open to just junk and clutter, and I think some serious thought needs to go into that.
Thank you, Mary. Paula.
Just one quick thought about what to do with the side pews. And I would agree with whoever it was that mentioned this. Don't throw them away, don't give them away. Put them in the basement. It's a big basement downstairs. I think there's room for 4 pews. So we could find some really useful way of using them, or putting them back if we have to.
Okay, I think we're at time in terms of
Nate, I think
quick little comment from Tom.
I guess the thing that just to reiterate, but I think the fact that it's a temporary experiment, and to be very clear that that's what we're doing here, because I think Mary brings up a good point. All of a sudden, the piano is going to become a fixture up there, as it needs to be. But there's a whole lot of things that I just think to make sure that we are thinking of this as an experiment to be taken one step at a time.
I really appreciate that. Thank you all so much. I feel like this conversation has been difficult, but also I feel like it's a sign of our strength as a congregation to be able to have this, and certainly more discernment needs to happen. That's something that I've heard today. And I also just want to say, Kit and I love you all, and we want to be your ministers no matter what happens, if anything, with these pews. I think we brought this forward because we thought we were in a place of strength as a congregation to be able to have this this discernment. Yeah, I really appreciate people bringing their hearts and their historical awareness, and I think we will be thinking, and we'll keep the conversation going. Anything you would leave us with, Gina?
No, I appreciate all the inputs, and thinking back to the portion of the presentation that I made, I didn't ask for your input, but if you have any thoughts, any feedback, feel free to send them to me or any member of the parish committee, and do be thinking about individually how each of us as individuals can become the collective to help our spiritual community handle and blossom and thrive as we grow.
May we go in peace. Thanks, everybody. Have a good afternoon.